We were going to go to, I'd been interested in sports car racing, and I used to go up to Westwood and one thing and another. And this fellow that I had been going out with, an older fellow, had a lovely blue Porsche, and we used to go to the races and one thing and another. Anyway, and George had a sports car too, I found, and we went to a sports car club dance. Was our first outing with Barry and Sheila, and that was, as I say, in March or something. And we hit it off quite well. I used to go down to, he was teaching in Merritt at the time, and he would come down drive down from Merritt every couple of weekends, and we'd go out with Barry and Sheila and one thing and another. And by, I think it was August, July or August, we were engaged. And then he used to come down quite regularly, and I would go after school down to his mom and dad's place on 8th Avenue near Dunbar and wait for him. And I'd stay at their place over the weekend, and then he would head back and I would head home. So I met him through a sports car club dance, and we used to, he and Barry used to be race marshals, and they used to marshal on the hairpin turn. So we used to be able to go to the races and sit inside the race track and watch the races from there. It was really quite neat. I still like to watch Formula One. But that's how we met. We used to go out with Barry and Sheila a lot. There was other friends of theirs from school, Bob Taylor, and we met his girlfriend was Mary, and then there was Jim Martin and his girlfriend Jean, and Vic Hobart, and who I know now is his second wife. Anyway, we used to do things together, go out for dinner and that sort of thing. And we all got married within a couple of years of each other. But that was, we just sort of hit it off, and it was nice that he was a teacher too.
And how old were you around this time?
Oh, I think I met him the year I was 24, and he would have been 25 or 26. I was born in 38, and this would have been 63. We were married in July of 64. Yeah, so I was I've got lots and lots of cousins on my mom's side, and a lot of them were married or at least going steady and all this sort of thing. And they used to talk about Doreen as having her career, because women married quite a lot younger in those days, often. So I was 25 when I got married, so that was oldish for the time. It worked out fine for us. George was a year and so many months older than me. His birthday was in April the 13th. He was born in 1937. So it was that group of people that we did our socializing and whatnot with. As it often was in those days, I think you socialized with the men's friends. And anyway, that's the way it worked out with us. And of course, my sister Barbara had been married before me, and then me, and she was a bridesmaid, and Wendy was a bridesmaid, and my cousin Phyllis, and my good girlfriend Flora, and another good friend from church, Marjorie. So we had a fairly good sized wedding party. Anyway, it was I was teaching and he was teaching, and he moved. He got into Maple Ridge for the first year that we were married. I think he was there a year, and then he got into Kitsilano High School, where he had been a student after that, so that we were both teaching in Vancouver. Yeah. George had a sister, and anyway, the families met and everybody got along and all that sort of stuff. Um, so it was a blind date and through friends, and so you kind of knew the background and all this sort of thing.
And then how long till you had kids?
Let's see, we were married in 1964, and we saved up, and for the princely sum of $15,500, we bought a house in 1966. In those days, they wouldn't count my earnings because, the women just quit work and have babies. I think I was making $7,500 the year I retired, which was equal to or a little more than what George was making. But we had $2,500 down plus a $2,500 second mortgage that I paid off that next year. When I was teaching, we paid the $2,500 off in that year, and so when I retired, we just had the one house payment, and we owed $10,000. That's what our mortgage was for, $10,000. And so I quit teaching in June of 1967, because in those days too, you couldn't be showing with a baby and still teach school. You had to quit. So we worked the timing out quite well, actually. And Jennifer was born on December 6th of 1967. So that all worked out quite well. We had we wanted a second child. We had an addition added so that we could have all 3 bedrooms upstairs. When we bought the house, there were 2 bedrooms upstairs and 1 downstairs. And we ultimately had the second bedroom, the downstairs bedroom turned into a playroom, and where we had the TV and stuff, and then we had 3 bedrooms upstairs and a half bath upstairs. And a couple of years later, in June of 1970, we adopted David. So our family was complete.
How old was he?
He was 11 days old. We got to go in and see. You had to go through a rigmarole, of course, and be vetted, and we had to get letters from friends in the church and whatnot attesting to our suitability to be parents. And we went to a number of meetings about what it's like to adopt a child. And, the big question in those days was, do you tell them that they're adopted? And I remember the lady telling us that if you choose to not tell them, then you look forward to lying for the rest of your life. And we didn't go for that either. And you waited longer if you wanted a girl, because a lot of men like to have their own house-grown boy, but George wasn't like that. So we said we'd like to adopt a boy, and in those days, within 3 months, 4 months, David came home with us. We went to the hospital to see him when he was 7 days old to see if we wanted him. George used to say, unless he had 3 heads, there was no way I was going to say no. And then when he was 11 days old, because I think the birth mom had 11 days to sign the papers to make her decision, we went into the Grace Hospital where he was born too, and was able to bring him home when he was 11 days old.
And what made you want to adopt initially?
Well, I particularly wanted another child, and I just didn't get pregnant again. And we had tests and all this sort of rigmarole to see why we weren't able to get pregnant again, and nothing seemed to, because I asked the doctor when Jennifer was 6 months old, is there any reason why we shouldn't have another one soon? And I was healthy. And of course, in those days, I was 29 when she was born, and that was quite old to have children too. So, we didn't want to wait around. And I just didn't get pregnant again. So we decided to adopt. And in those days, it was quite quick. We wanted a boy, and anyway, one thing and another, it turned, he was such a sweetheart. Um, Everybody was, excited and see this anyway. Much later, after he was 19 or around 19 or so, we met his birth parents. And so it's been a very positive thing pretty well all around. So we were very fortunate because we always told him we'd help him look for his birth parents. But he was one that would change his mind every 2 seconds. So we said, when you're 19 and you kind of firmly made a decision, we will help you find your birth parents. But they found us, as it turned out. Initially, you had to it could only go one way when you looked for parents, or I can't remember all the rigmarole, but laws changed, and then they were able to find us. So that was neat. The kids went to what was the name? For heaven's sakes, what's the name of that little school across the? Can't remember the name of the school they went to. It was just not far from us. And then they went to Sexsmith Elementary, and then Jennifer went to Churchill, and David went to I can't remember the name of it either. I know we can find out, but anyway, local schools and whatnot. We lived in the neighborhood on near Cambie and Marine is where we bought our house. We lived there till the kids were till, what year did we move? 2011 we moved. 2011 we moved.
And what were they like growing up?
Jennifer was, I can remember we'd go and visit friends for tea and whatnot, and Jennifer was always clamped to my leg. She was very, very shy, and didn't, anyway, she would stay. David, he'd be out playing or whatever. He was very outgoing little kid. And she was very, very shy and one thing and another, and she'd just get settled somewhere and start feeling comfortable, and it'd be time to go home. Which and she wanted to always do everything just right. And I remember when she was getting, but she was a cute little thing. She had, I used to make a lot of her clothes and whatnot. We had fun. She used to like to do the dishes at Grandma's house with a great big apron tied around her middle. David was very much outgoing, and fortunately, George, his dad, my husband, he spent hours and hours and hours playing with David, because he just couldn't sit still. We found out he was later diagnosed with hyperactivity, whatever it's called, ADHD, which affected his schooling and everything. It made life quite hard for him and for us too. He'd go off after school and not tell me, and anyway, there was a lot of going up to the school and finding out how he was and hearing that he was the worst kid in the school and all this sort of thing, when really in those days they didn't diagnose things very well, and it was a real struggle. So I'm quite proud of the fact that he graduated from high school and stuck to it. Eventually he was diagnosed in one thing and another, and he went to a class at King Edward that was, he went to David Thompson for a while because they had a class after junior high to help kids with his difficulty try and get through. And then he went to King Edward because they had not King Edward, Kits, and he was a little leery of that because his dad taught there and he didn't want anybody to know. Eventually, when he kind of heard around that his dad was a pretty good guy, he didn't mind. But I used to, I worked out at the university at that time at the Vancouver School of Theology, and I used to drive him to school on my way to work in the morning in this funny little old truck that we had. Jennifer went to Churchill. She built a lot of character trying to get through French, etc. And she had good friends there. She took sewing as well and did some quite nice things. She had good girlfriends. She did a lot of swimming. She got her lifeguard duty and all that sort of stuff. When she was 16, she was up at the church Camp Artaban on Gambier Island, and I think she was on the waterfront out there. Used to have a licensed lifeguard and a person over the age of whatever. I remember I was that person one summer because I wasn't a lifeguard for sure, but she and her friend Sarah were they were sleek and slim and trim that year. They did a lot of swimming. And she, they did, and I can't remember if she worked part-time too or not, most likely. They used to get in each other's hair because David was always into things. I remember we finally put a lock on her door just to hook an eye up high where he couldn't reach it. He didn't mean to break things or anything, but he tended to. Oh, and David and I used to spend a lot of time with hockey cards. He was very sports mad, and I like to watch hockey too. And we'd go through all the cards many a time. What team is this guy from and all that? And then he used to build things. He built a construction in our front room one year that covered most of the carpet. It was really quite something. And he had some good friends too, but he always wanted to be with the in group. Remember, I think it was his 13th birthday, he invited these various and sundry kids that were sort of the in kids at his school. And they came, and I think they were pleasantly surprised. We had various games going in the backyard, and we ordered pizza and all this sort of thing. And it was quite a nice birthday. I remember that's when Thriller was out, because he got that for his birthday. Apparently that is the most bought long play ever. His Thriller has sold more records than anything else. So school was not a pleasure for him. But he made it through. He initially, I mean, he had no trouble. Kindergarten or preschool, he was in the preschool teachers would say one time they phoned me because he wasn't feeling well, and she said the girls were fighting over who's going to get to look after David. I mean, he was a real charmer, and I mean, he was just a nice kid, and he got on well with people, and but schooling turned into quite a struggle, and so that's why I'm proud that he graduated. Jennifer, of course, graduated. She did very well in English. In fact, she took baccalaureate English. They did it a year international baccalaureate program at Churchill, and the year before they instated it officially, they ran a class for students, so to see how it would go. And she was in that class. She was really good. She got one of her stories printed in a book that they did with all various short stories written by I think it was grade 12 students in Vancouver one year. So We'll have to ask her for that book sometime, little book. She was out and around. Apparently her dad was much more cognizant of her forays into alcohol and so on than I was oblivious, quite oblivious apparently. She had a curfew and she got a lot of kids home. They'd be out somewhere. Oh, we gotta get Jennifer home. But as I say, I was oblivious to things, and her dad used to go in of a Sunday morning. She would be going to church with me or whatever, and he'd whip open the blinds and pull off the covers because he knew she was not feeling up to snuff really, but he wouldn't let her not go. I heard all this later. That's when I didn't mind hearing it. I would have been. Anyway, she had a good bunch of friends that she used to go out and about with, and she worked. She went to Langara, and then Simon Fraser, and she got her degree at Simon Fraser in history. And that led her to help in the long run, because ultimately she moved to Calgary later, and with her undergraduate degree and 2 more years at the University of Calgary, she got her teaching degree, and she teaches kindergarten in Calgary.
So kind of once they move out of the house, and now you're in like the retirement kind
of
stage.
I was still working. No, well, George. She graduated in 1985, and David would have been 3 years later. So he would have graduated in 88. I went back to work in 1986.
So from then, how would teaching kind of changed from when you started early on to kind of how it evolved?
Well, George really know. I didn't ever go back to teaching. He went back, but yeah, it changed considerably for him. It was much freer. He was a man teaching in industrial education. They started having girls in the IE departments, and he said he had to always leave the door open. Couldn't have a girl in the class with the door shut if there wasn't all the rest of the students too. And as curriculums changed and whatnot, he ended up teaching jewelry, because he started teaching automotive, and then he ended up teaching jewelry among other things, because the program, like I think the home ec departments, I don't think they even exist anymore in schools, and I think that happened with the industrial education classes too. He taught automotive, and all these different things. But I think as school changed, those kind of classes changed too. He was still teaching industrial education when he retired, but he was teaching, he taught computer drafting, and he taught wood shop, and he taught metalwork. But I think towards the end, those kind of classes were not there, and that's why they brought in like jewelry and things like this, because and the attitudes towards it and a lot of things like that changed a lot. Thinking of, like, when I quit teaching, I couldn't be showing as being pregnant. When Jennifer finished grade 1, which is what I had taught, her teacher, I think, had her baby no more than a month after she finished grade 1. So things had changed a lot in that, because when I started teaching, we couldn't wear pants. The women had to wear skirts. Nowadays, trying to tell you what you had to wear would be, they'd get nowhere with that. The first year I taught, I had to go to in-service training once a week, all through the year. This Miss Roy, who used to teach it, wow, you did what you were told, and when she said hop, you asked, we were more I think, regimented than maybe the teachers definitely are now. There wasn't kindergarten classes when I first started teaching, so we went the gamut through the measles and the mumps and the chicken pox through the classroom each year. And when kindergarten started, then that stopped because the kids would get it the year before.
Mm.
We used to get polio vaccine. They'd come to the schools to give, because that was a real big deal in those years, first years. I remember the first, I guess it was Sputnik or something, anyway, and everybody was really worried about bombs and all this sort of stuff. In some ways, I guess it was simpler times. Most of the mums still were at home. Kids went home for lunch. That sort of thing. Yeah, we could play Christmas carols when the kids came in from the playground at recess and lunchtime. We had Christmas concerts that we called Christmas concerts. We walked in lines to go from one end of the school to the other where the gym was and so on. The kids sat in lines and desks. Towards the end of my teaching career, they were thinking about, they were doing, what did they call it? Anyway, where some kids might take 4 years to do the elementary grades, and some kids might do it quicker. And I had a class where the kids might take, because I'd asked for it actually, might take 4, so they were the less mature kids and whatnot. I had a lot of boys, and the class was only 21 kids. That was really quite small because they'd been well over 30 when I first started teaching. So that was kind of interesting. I really liked the people we taught with in our school. The people all shared things. I'd heard when I used to go to these classes where the teachers would close their doors so the other teachers couldn't see what they had done as far as class decoration and all that. Mm-hmm. In the school I went to, everybody, oh, I've got a good idea. Well, everybody used it then, sort of a thing. I think I had good respect for my kids. I did please and thank you to them the same as I do for any other people. I didn't have the quietest classroom always. And towards the latter time when we were doing this other thing, we had not desks on runners on the floor like we did initially. We had individual desks, and you could move them around and put them in groups and this sort of thing. And I like to try that sort of thing. They were such sweet kids. But I only taught for 9 years. And thinking the thing is with teaching, you could always go back to it if you had to, but I never did. When the kids were in elementary school at Sexsmith, I worked around the lunchroom for a while, and then through the church, I volunteered at the church archives, and then ultimately got that position where I worked for 20 years, and it went from 12 hours a week to 4 days a week. Quite like that. Again, I liked being my own boss. At the archives, I was not at the office, the church office. I was separate. And so I pretty well could organize my own time and all that sort of thing. Same with teaching. You have your principal and all that, but you can you pretty well decide all your. And I rather like that. Summers when the kids were little, we used to, I guess from when Jennifer was 18 months old, I think, and Sean Mulgrew from Barry and Sheila, who introduced us, the summer he turned 2, his birthday was in August, we went up to a place called Gardam Lake near Enderby, and we used to go for 2 weeks every summer for years. Barbara and Marvin used to come up, Bob and Mary Taylor used to come up, Dorothy and Russell Sigerson used to come up. Yeah, I guess there were 4 families of us, and we used to have a lovely time there. There's a beach, and you could walk out through the bushes on this other little island, and there was sort of a boardwalk floating right across the lake, and we used to go out there with inner tubes and things.
Mm.
The kids wore these mussels, we called them, that you blew up on their arms, and that we did that for years. I'm not sure how many. The first 2 years, Barry and Sheila and us shared a cabin with because the first year there was just Jennifer and their two kids, Michelle, who was a tiny baby, and Sean. And the next year we had David, so there'd be 4 of us in each bedroom. And the year after that, we each got our own places. But and there'd be the other people there, with the same people that came every year at the same time, and it was really quite nice. Otherwise, George was home through the summer, so through the summer we'd go to the beach and different things like that, or play in the yard and visit cousins and all that sort of stuff.
So then, flash forward a couple years to when your kids have kids. What do you remember about your grandchildren, kind of early in the?
Oh goodness. Well, David and Jennifer, David and his girlfriend got married in 2000, and they had our first grandchild in 2001, Jackson. And I can remember Jennifer was still living at home, or still in Vancouver then, and we heard from David that the baby was born, and he was out in Surrey or New Westminster, I can't remember. So we zipped out there. David got to the hospital and left her at the door, and then went and found a place to park. Anyway, it was the day Jackson was born, the day after Mummy Jennifer's birthday. He was, of course, the most beautiful baby in the world, and so we saw him when he was very young, and Jennifer had we used to visit a lot as we see the baby, and when he was 1 year old and Jennifer had to go back to work, we used to babysit on Fridays. So he was a year old. They would like us to have babysat for 2 years, but I worked from Monday to Thursday, and while George was retired, he didn't think he wanted to babysit on his own. So we used to have him every Friday, take him grocery shopping, and he used to be sound asleep by the time we got home. And we lift him up and put him in the cradle the crib that his dad had slept in. And Jennifer, Auntie Jen, used to babysit him. She had her apartment, and David and Jennifer